Oh hell internet, and please forgive my primitive auto cue. This totally isn't a Raya and the Last Dragon review, but I am going to start there, so if that's why you clicked on this video, stick around until it gets weird, which won't take that long. In short, yes, I enjoyed the movie, although it is a bit Disney, of course, which is to say that there is a nice moral to a cool story that is nearly buried under the narrative cliches and stylistic anachronisms of a corporate juggernaut which has itself almost achieved the level of a religion. But as we will see, there may be a reason why that continues to be so popular. To introduce the plot, a fictional Southeast Asian continent is divided into 5 distinct lands who deeply distrust each other. Much of this stems from the events of 500 years earlier, when a great scourge was defeated at the cost of the Dragon Guardians, and now the only remnant of dragon magic is held in a crystal which is protected by the province of Heart. Spoiler alert, the scourge returns, and it all goes to crap. And someone has to go on a quest to somehow find the last dragon and save the world! Woo! Upon watching the movie and its central theme of trust, I would say I have 2 general thoughts. One, it doesn't entirely stick the narrative landing, and I blame Disney for this, but we'll get to that more. But 2, the message itself is actually quite modern, and I think it rails against what might be called the Twitter sphere. That online social media space where people seem to act like their personal opinions and grievances can achieve some kind of apotheosis and turn them all into the world-preserving messiahs that they secretly know themselves to be. And if you are righteously thinking, yeah, that's what they're all like right now, then rest assured I'm talking about you too. Hell, I'm not immune. I have my own blind spots, and I spend enough of my time watching all the other tribes that I also sometimes get infected by their indignation. But to try and soothe everyone who I just insulted, which is to say, everyone, there may actually be a reason why an arena in which our meaningless prattle can technically reach the ear of humanity. This brings out our inner Jehovah's Witness, shall we say. Slight real spoilers from here on, but the scourge I referred to in the movie are these twisting maelstroms of dark energy, which turn people into stone when they touch them. And each time they turn someone to stone, they divide in 2 and proliferate. They move without any other purpose, and their only intent is to multiply themselves by overcoming every living being. They are released as a direct result of the lack of trust between people of different cultural traditions. The way that they turn people into these heartless statues, incapable of growth, movement, or flexibility, mirrors the mindset of people who allow themselves to lose sight of the fact that every human just wants to live a life. That's all. And if we think that we have a right to live the life that we have chosen for ourselves, then we should jolly well make it a priority to extend that courtesy as widely as we possibly can, which includes all the people that you personally think are ruining the country or the world. Yes, you. This is why I think Raya and the Last Dragon has a modern message, because a lack of trust as a cultural problem is a modern issue. In the past, there was no economy of trust. This is not to say that there was no trust, but as an ideal, it was much weaker, because the various provinces of the world were so markedly different and geographically isolated that there was no place for implicit trust as a means of getting along. And rightly so. We really were more culturally diverse back then, and there was a much better reason to be genuinely fearful of what a different culture might do to us because of a certain lack of understanding. Another thing I liked about Raya and the Last Dragon was the effective hero's journey that it presented. Yes, once again, the Disneyfication of it all meant that it was hardly a transcendent experience, but I'm adept at suspending my disbelief. I can take enjoyment from a story that thinks it's Tolkien, but is in fact Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Game of Thrones Season 8. Pardon? What? Sorry? Within the narrative, Raya is the main hero, and her opponent represents a duality, at once being like her and also very different. But of course, as she travels through the provinces, she assembles a group consisting of a citizen from each of the other lands, and together the party must, in microcosm, come to embody the principle that will heal the world by taking a first step. And through their sacrifice, they make possible the future prosperity that they wish to bring about. Although, in reality, the story ends at exactly the point where the real work would begin. That is to say, where people of multiple diverse cultures have to begin to conceive of themselves as one people. And here comes the bait and switch, because what I really want to talk about in this video is the hero's journey itself, and the man who popularized it, Joseph Campbell. At this point, some might be pleased, but some will be annoyed, even angry. Some will be disappointed, some will be confused. Stick with me, and I hope to relate how I think Joseph Campbell, in spite of some criticisms, is still an important figure in comparative mythology. Joseph Campbell published The Hero with a Thousand Faces in 1949. The thesis of the book is that the myriad myths and fairy tales of all human cultures take their inspiration from a single essence, the monomyth, which represents every human crisis, from that of birth and infancy, through the crisis of reaching maturity, even up to the challenges of personal development, to facing the final challenge of embracing eternity at the end of it all. Campbell has faced criticism from senior scholars of folklore to the effect that he oversimplifies the myths he sees in various cultures. This criticism is fair, but I'm not sure that it's actually that significant for our purposes. Comparative mythology is not the same as mythology itself, and Campbell's heart is in the right place, although his Western normative bias frequently shines through. But at the end of the day, the only thing we really need to take from the hero's journey is what Campbell calls its nuclear form: separation, initiation, and return. Why must we accept the nuclear form of the hero quest? Well, because the human life is a flying fish. We appear momentarily out of the deep into a different kind of existence for just a brief time before disappearing back into the darkness. Insofar as the different religions of the world agree on anything, it is that we emerge from something, or maybe nothing. We live our life in this state of being and then, as far as we can tell, disappear back into that same thing from which we came: separation, initiation, and return. This motif is reflected in the form of every life, as well as the life of every form which that life brings into being. This is what Campbell hopes to explore, and every generalization he makes is in service of this. Yes, obviously there are areas in which a more nuanced analysis of these traditions could open up a further discussion of the different value systems therein. And personally, I think Campbell did have an awareness of this, but he did, as do we all, have his culturally founded blind spots. The Hero with a Thousand Faces opens with this line: "Throughout the inhabited world, in all times, the myths of man have flourished. Myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into human cultural manifestation. The bold and truly epoch-making writings of the psychoanalysts are indispensable to the student of mythology. In the absence of an effective general mythology, each of us has his private, unrecognized, rudimentary, yet secretly potent pantheon of dream." By taking a Freudian perspective in this way of the human unconscious, Campbell uses the stark dualities of early life to make the foundation of what will become the hero quest. Apparently, the most permanent of the dispositions of the human psyche are those that derive from the fact that, of all the animals, we remain the longest at the mother's breast. The unfortunate father is the first radical intrusion of another order of reality into the excellence of the situation within the womb. We can see here Campbell's clear distinction between the genders, which we will return to momentarily. But these stark confrontations are, says Campbell, the principal forms that create our development as independent beings, and hence all the later developments that we make in the course of our lives. And although Freud has somewhat fallen out of favour over recent years, some of the things that he laid down have still found their way into modern psychology in the form of attachment and personality theories. All of these phantasms of the unconscious come to us from beyond that dark mirror, and everyone has these, whether we acknowledge them or not. Conservatives, pardon, what? The unconscious mind sends all sorts of vapours, odd beings, terrors, and deluding images up into the mind. The Doctor is the modern master of the mythological realm. His role is precisely that of the wise old man of the myths and fairy tales, whose words assist the hero through the trials and terrors of the weird adventure. As we can see, Campbell owes much not only to Freud, but also to Jung in the formation of his ideas, and he was not the first comparative mythologist. He refers repeatedly to Fraser's The Golden Bough, which I must say I have not read. Seriously, have you seen the size of that book? But he was the first to make it so accessible to a wide cultural audience, and this was assisted by his association with George Lucas. The story of the first Star Wars trilogy is explicitly an exploration of ideas contained within the hero's journey, and this is perhaps one of the reasons why Star Wars has remained such a cultural touchstone for people across the decades since its release. I'm not going to tackle the stages of the hero's journey in this video, like if you would like to see more about Campbell's work, but this is just why I think he remains relevant. And so, in light of this, we must address criticisms that are sometimes levelled at Campbell of chauvinistic attitudes towards women and paternalism towards so-called primitive cultures that he talks of. Again, much of this criticism is fair. Campbell was a man of his time, and that time was rampant colonialism and patriarchy, to the point where it was not even seriously questioned. However, some of the problems come as a result of Campbell's poetic style, clearly. Campbell often repeats that the hero may be a person of any gender, and although he himself did have different aims in mind for the goal in terms of male and female, from our modern point of view, it is entirely possible, I would say trivial, to neutralise these prejudices and acknowledge that what may have been true in his time is no longer true in ours, and to have an honest discussion about the implications of this. For example, we may simply state that the word hero is treated as gender neutral in the most abstract sense, and admit that it does have practically skewed implications in the minds of individual humans, including Campbell himself. But furthermore, we can leave open the possibility of sub-defining into hero as opposed to heroine in the expression of certain masculine and feminine energies. At the end of the day, it has always been the prime function of mythology and rite to supply the symbols that carry the human spirit forward, in counteraction to those other constant human fantasies that tend to tie it back. Apparently, there is something in these initiatory images so necessary to the psyche that if they are not supplied from without, through myth and ritual, they will have to be announced again through dream from within. Campbell is explicitly stating the practical need for mythology in psychoanalytic terms. We see very clearly, and modern fandoms have only reinforced this, that something in the human psyche needs to find some reference to the imagery of the nuclear form, wherever it is found. In the preliminary section of the book, Campbell details the tale of King Minos and the Minotaur, who was born when the king's wife was seduced by a magnificent white bull and gave birth to the monster. Campbell notes that although public blame was placed on the Queen for her behaviour, it was in fact the sins of the king himself that were the most serious. For this white bull, bestowed as a supernatural gift of the gods, was intended to become a sacrifice that would ensure the prosperity of the whole city. But Minos, in his conceit, had dared to take it for himself and then sacrificed his own mundane animals in its place. With this act of unbridled ego, the king had failed in his sacred duty as the son of heaven, to use the Eastern term, and he had become the tyrant monster who inflicted terrible misfortune on his people, and the sinful queen and her cursed child were the first among his victims. The figure of the tyrant monster is known to the mythologies, and his characteristics are everywhere essentially the same. He is the hoarder of the general benefit. He is the monster avid for the greedy rights of me and mine. And just as an aside here, I would mention that certain cultural critics on the conservative side have often overemphasized the dangers of chaos, and of course those dangers are very real. But the tyrant monster is definitely an example where an excessive devotion to one's personal form of order can lead to dangers that are almost or even more serious. These kinds of failure, whether in myth, in history, or in the life of the individual, are the events which demand redress of cosmic balance, which is the purpose of the hero's quest. But the nature of the solution must always be commensurate with the nature of the problem. Campbell quotes Arnold Toynbee. Schism in the soul, schism in the body social, will not be resolved by any scheme of return to the good old days, archaism, or by programs guaranteed to render an ideal projected future, futurism. And so we see why the nature of the hero quest is, and always will be, so complicated. Because although we try to draw a cultural boundary between past and future where we can exist in the present day, there will never be a perfect resolution to any cultural problem, even on a cultural level. And furthermore, the relationship between every person and their own mythical landscape will be unique, a personal relationship with God. Dream is personalized myth. Myth depersonalized dream. Both myth and dream are symbolic in the same general way of the dynamics of the psyche. In the story of the Minotaur, it is Theseus who, under the guidance of others, must reflect the nuclear form by disappearing into the labyrinth to face the beast, and thus bring balance and prosperity back to the land. Separation, initiation, and return. The hero has died as a modern man, but as eternal man, perfected, unspecific, universal man, he has been reborn. His second solemn task, therefore, is to return to us transfigured and teach the lesson he has learned. The multitude of men and women choose the less adventurous way, but these seekers too are saved by virtue of the inherited symbolic aids of society. It is only those who know neither an inner call nor an outer doctrine, whose plight is truly desperate. That is to say, most of us today, in this labyrinth without and within the heart. Again, we can simply ignore the question of Campbell's own bias and transpose hero across the genders. We should also note that this inherited symbolic aid of society is precisely what we lack in the modern world, and the conservatives are not wrong on this. However, there is no reversing the pace of change, and that is the problem we must find a solution to. Campbell finishes the first section by poetically rendering the nature of the conflicting dualities which represent the resolution of the quest. We must all, in our own lives, enter the labyrinth, and we have only to follow the hero path, and where we had thought to find an abomination, we shall find a god. Where we had thought to slay another, we shall slay ourselves. Where we had thought to travel outward, we shall come to the centre of existence, and where we had thought to be alone, we shall be with all the world. To come full circle, Raya and the Last Dragon has all these aspects of the hero's journey arranged in a pleasing fantasy context with a surprisingly modern message, even if it does have to be accessed through bland piles of Disney cliches so generic I'm surprised how it can still get a trademark. Just kidding, I'm not really surprised at all. You relentlessly manipulative corporate zombie mouse. What? In all seriousness, I don't actually blame individuals at Disney. I don't think anyone is in full control of the iconography of that company anymore. As I said before, Disney is a cultural creed now. It will generate forms according to its doctrine. Actual creativity is now less desirable and only becomes less important through time. The stories that are produced by this edifice will become more and more ossified. And on that note, major spoiler here. Come on, that ending was pretty kick-ass, right? Where they all slowly sacrifice themselves to the stone and literally become one, an iconic representation of cultural unity. Sure, I think the story as a whole lost something through the telling, but that one moment of resolution I thought was pretty great. The idea of building enduring trust across cultures in order to unify diverse power groups with conflicting ideas about how to live is not one which humanity has often seen the need to indulge, astonishingly. But the model of separation, initiation, and return is as applicable as ever, and in this case, the gender of the hero and the villain serve as proof of my early assertion that there's no need to hold Campbell's theory to any of his own more old-fashioned perspectives. As for the Twitter sphere, in the bubbling mass of today's culture, the unconscious of humanity bubbles on, and it sends up all sorts of vapors, odd beings, terrors, and deluding images up into the conscious mind. We all want to think of ourselves as part of the zeitgeist because, in some way, we all are. And in an age where the pace of information exchange is so enormous, the vapors rise constantly. But this can be dangerous because our presence in the zeitgeist, whether you are on social media or not, is minuscule compared to our sense of our own presence in our everyday experience. And we should do well to remember that, lest we have an inflated idea of our own opinions and our ideology should become a scourge. Oh, and one more thing. The whole Southeast Asian theme, it's pretty much skin deep, as many people have said, at least as far as I can see. It looks the part, for sure, but the resemblance pretty much ends there. What did you think of Raya and the Last Dragon? From what I've seen, opinions appear to be mixed, but I had some fun with it. What do you think of my take, and what do you think of Joseph Campbell? Anyway, thanks for watching, and bye for now.